Hello all. Uh, Welcome to the BITS-ACM SI Prep Talk. I am Pratham. I am a third year CS and I would be doing my summer intern at a tea show this summer. Now all of you might be wondering what the hype is all about the intern season. So at the end of your pre-final year, you have the opportunity to work for 8 weeks at a company of your choice. To get a company, you can either find a company yourself, but most people who get an internship do so through the on-campus tests and interviews by in the companies that are invited by the placement unit. The internship is usually the only and the major work experience on your resume before the placement season. And quite often, these internships will result in a pre-placement offer. Hence, this will be your first chance of getting placed through college, which will provide two more chances of getting placed after the th- summer, which would be a placement season, and your PS2. You can also find an off-campus intern or go for a research intern in the summer. Now, most of you might have heard the terms of days. We often say that a person got placed in a day zero company, or Microsoft is a day one company. And usually it is not clear what this actually means. So what it means is that when a company wants to participate in the intern season, the placement unit they divide these companies into groups based on their stipend and their reputation. And each and every company that will participate in this season would have an online test for the first shortlist of candidates. Once all the companies in a group are done with the test, the interviews are scheduled on a single day. This interview day is what we call as day zero, day one, and day two. You give interviews for all the companies that you have been shortlisted by, and at the end of the day, these companies announce the results. If you have multiple offers, you have free to choose your preferred company. What is the timeline for the season, intern season? Although there are some companies like Google and Coordination which will have the online test as early as the last week of July, or by the first week of August, the main intern season officially begins in the first week of September. The day zero companies will have the test in the first week of September, and usually uh, by the end of the first week, you will have your day zero interviews. Some day zero companies which visit this time were DSoC, Goldman Sachs, Uber, and there are some companies which also visit in between these days. Like this year, it was Bloomberg. After that, day one companies will visit in the next week, and day two in the next week. As there are quite a few companies in day one and day zero, there can be more than one online test on the same day. So it can get hectic. But after day two is completed, the companies will keep coming, but it won't be as hectic uh, as the online test will be scheduled on different days. At this point, we would like to give a disclaimer. Next, we are going to present a preparation guide and our experiences. So this is what had worked for us and the people we know. But there's no sure way of approaching the intern season and to guarantee successful outcome. So there's that, and we'll only be covering IT internships. We would not be covering core or finance. How to prepare for this? The first uh, part of the intern season is to clear a online coding test. Then only you will be allowed to sit in an interview. This clearing the online coding test requires a very strong DSA and a good practice of writing code in a limited time. So, to write good code, you need to know the standard libraries of your preferred language. We recommend that you use either C++, Java, or Python because C++ is most widely used and has the best eh, standard libraries. This will make the code you write uh, better, and it will be easy to debug, which will save you time. So first of all, start with the language practice on a platform like HackerRank, so that you are comfortable with the language and its libraries. Then you can move to a structured DSA course such as interview bit. And once you're done with it, what is now required is practice. And usually lead code is thought of to the best choice for it. You can think of computer programming as maths. The more you practice, the better you get at it. And if you're a CS student, then your interviews will likely go very high weightage to your OOP and DBS concepts. Your OOP concepts will include your design patterns, would be which have been covered in your course. And similarly for the DBS concepts, which most of you would be uh, having right now, you must know how to write SQL queries. And so you must make sure that you know your concepts well and revise. For DSA, it is usually acceptable that you are able to tell the interview what you're thinking and how you are, and you can try to write the code, but it is usually fine if you're not able to debug your code at that time. Now, it is also important to keep in mind that the process can be quite random at times. It can vary from an year to the next, and it can also during the season there can be randomness. Like the CGPA cutoff usually is 7, but there will be companies that will offer a lower cutoff. Like Cisco, this year offered 6.5. There was a company LTI which offered S0s to non-CS students. And then please don't be discouraged if you do not have an offer by day two. There are a lot of companies that will visit it later too. Salesforce even came back for a second round of hiring. And as we know, as the season progresses, stipends usually come down, but there are always companies which come later in the season with a higher pay, such as Demio, which came in Jan, and they offered as much as some day one companies this year. Now I'm going to share my personal experience. So personally, what I did was I had a basic understanding of DSA before the uh, summer of this year began. How I did this, I solved the easy questions on HackerRank. So I had a good grip on the C++ uh, libraries, and also knew a few data sources such as trees. Then for the structured DSA course, I targeted 45 days to cover all the topics. And for this, then you can move to lead code. And my approach was to write clear, concise code, which is easy to debug. Uh, if you visit sites like Codeforce or Codeshare, you might see people using templates, and these templates usually are made so that you can write code with a very high speed. But I would not recommend using these, as more than speed, it is about how fast you're able to debug your code. And similarly, I would not recommend Codeforce or CodeChef for prep, because the questions are on these platforms are formulated in a different way. I use C++ as my primary language, and Java whenever I need some library functionality that was not available in C++, especially for OOPs. And there are some library things which are not there in C++. You will get to know when you are coding. And similarly, I also use Python when I did not need the STL, but the implementation complicated, such as when the functions needed multiple return values. Every year, you can expect that the placement unit might also have some course. They will have a tie-up with some company, and they will offer TSA course. In our case, it was a company called as Jobsy. They gave us a choice of courses. So these courses usually help to understand the difficult or typical questions, as we could call them, and more importantly, have a very good question bank. And while using C plus STL, make sure you use it as far as possible. You do not need to create your own linked list or your own binary trees. You can always use the STL list or the STL map. Similarly, to STL set is quite often used. Uh, there are also a function in the string class and the package algorithms.h. You must go through them. You can find these on GFG and C++reference.com. Once you're done with your basic data structures, you should also know some data structures such as unified and binary index tree. Some companies like Google and Coordination always have a question on these. And as, as you will start preparing, it will take quite a lot of time for you to meet it, to complete hard questions. But I would recommend that you spend quite a lot of time thinking about them, and only in your last month you go on lead code and you practice with virtual contests so that you will understand how to manage time. Last but not the least, it is important that you maintain momentum and try not to miss even a single day of coding. As I said earlier, you can think of computer programming as maths. The more you practice and the better momentum you have, it is good for you. And of course, revise your hoop and DBM as well. Now, I would like to call Tirth, who would be carrying on.
Hey, can you move to the next? Yeah, good. So yeah, I'm Tirth. My experience was like widely different from Pratham's, mainly because I started very late. I think it was already the last week of May when I started like taking this seriously. Plus, I had a research intern going on in the summer, which took like 6 to 8 hours of the day every day. So I didn't have a lot of time to like go through the theory, do interview bit, then do lead code. Can you go to the previous slide? Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. So yeah. Uh, hmm. So firstly, if it's already very late when you're starting, then I would recommend you don't focus on theory that much because you don't have that much time honestly, and companies usually only look for like three things: that's how fast you can write code, how clean your code is, and how well it functions. All three are equally important. So yeah, the more code you're writing, the better it is for you. So yeah, your aim should be to learn as you're solving questions. So like learn something new from every question you're solving. So initially you won't be able to solve that many questions because you're a noob, honestly, and you don't know the theory. So you'll have to read a lot of solutions. So there's nothing bad about it. Usually people uh, try not reading solutions, but I think that's not very helpful. So spend enough time on a question. Spend 40 to 45 minutes on a question. If you're not able to solve it still, it's more beneficial for you to look at the solution, because remember you want to solve a lot of questions, so you don't want to be stuck on one question for 4 hours. uh, Sometimes the official solutions posted are not very helpful because they're expecting you know stuff already. So sometimes you can find better solutions in the discussion section. People post a lot of good solutions in the comments, so go through them. Even for questions you've solved already, go through them. You might learn something new or like a new way of solving the question. um, yeah. Thirdly, I will recommend lead code over interview bit. Personally, I never was able to stick to lead interview bit. Uh, Probably because I didn't like the interface. So lead code is fine in itself. Lead code. The only problem with lead code is it has a lot of questions, which can be daunting for a beginner. I think it's almost 2,000 questions or something. So no one expects you to solve all of them though. So there's like 2 to 3 approaches you can take to like make your lead code experience smoother. Firstly, there's an explore section on lead code which has like stuff divided into topics. So they introduce you to some theory, and then they like give you easy questions, and they like make them progressively more difficult. So the explore section is very good for topics you have no idea of. So if you're just starting and you want to learn like linked list or like a binary tree or recursion, so those are very helpful. Secondly, you can, once you're done with the explore section, you can sort questions by their frequency. So questions which are very frequent in interviews, you should aim to solve them in the beginning. Then move on to like lesser and lesser frequent questions. Thirdly, people on LeetCode, make a lot of lists. There are community sourced lists. They're usually like based on topics or based on uh, like companies or based on just like top 100 questions. They're usually helpful, in my experience at least, because rather than solving questions randomly, you can like you at least know where to pick questions from, and you get a sense of completion when you're like done with the list. So it's also good for your like, yeah, self confidence. Uh, yeah, so especially with DP and graphs, these lists are very helpful because DP is a very big topic. People think of it as a single topic, but there's like a lot of things going on there. So there's a lot of types of questions. So like mostly DP questions, you can segregate them into types. So if there's a list that does that very well, then very good for you. One list I really recommend is Blind 75. That was a very good list. So you can go through it. Uh, for questions and their difficulty, this is a good bifurcation, like three easy questions, five medium, and two hard. Medium questions is where the meats are. Um, coding round questions are usually medium to like slightly more difficult than medium questions, and interviews are generally easier, so they have medium, easy to medium, or like just like around medium questions in their interviews. So yeah, focus on this. Try to maintain this pattern. Uh, can you move to the next slide? Yeah, there's for some reason there is a lot of debate going on like what language to use. Like it happens every year. People will recommend C++ a lot. Uh, it has its benefits, but if you're already like familiar with something else, so like I was very familiar with Python. I knew Python a lot, and I was familiar with the standard library. I knew the tricks. So there's almost no harm in using a different language than C++. Plus, I find Python easier to write. So I used Python in almost all my coding rounds and my interviews. So the interviewer doesn't mind like you using Python or something, but you should still learn C++. It's important because interviewers will like to test you on OOP concepts, and C++ is easier to demonstrate those concepts in, or they'll like try asking you if the code will compile. And in Python, usually stuff that shouldn't work also works. So if the interviewer is specifically looking for OOP, then you should use C++ or Java because their concepts are more transparent than Python. So yeah. Secondly, an interview tip: uh, try talking to the interviewer as much as you can. This will not be helpful right now, but like once you clear the coding rounds, this step will be very helpful for you. Uh, in some cases, the interviewer will not let you write even a single line of code unless and until you've explained a satisfying approach to them. So yeah, companies, in my experience, are usually looking for conversational people who can work well with teammates. So it's a good sign that you're able to hold a conversation with your interviewer. Yeah, as I mentioned this already, I think interviews are generally easier than coding rounds. So once you clear the coding round, focus more on like standard questions because interviews usually don't ask something very out of the blue. So they'll focus on like some standard question of like graphs or DP or like hash tables or binary trees. So there's quite a few lists of these questions. You can find them online. I mentioned Blind 75, I think, so it'll be in the resources as well. So once you're done with the coding round and you're shortlisted for an interview, focus on like standard questions and focus on design problems. People usually don't focus on design problems in the beginning or like before coding rounds. So it's very helpful for you to like focus or just like read up design problems and their solutions once you're shortlisted for a coding for an interview. Yeah. Now, a very important point some people miss is interviews are not the same, and they're not a judge of your abilities. So, don't get disheartened if you're like not able to perform very well in an interview. Sometimes you're in a bad mood. Sometimes the interviewer is in a bad mood. Sometimes you haven't slept enough. Sometimes you just panic. So things will happen. This will happen more times than you'll expect. So it's not a bad thing though. Like if you fuck up one interview, there's always going to be more. So don't worry too much about like one single interview. Um, yeah, and again, like if you're not able to solve a question in an interview, it's generally accepted that you just explain a solution. Um, Lastly, and like this is like my most important advice, I think here is people will tell you like how to make a resume. There'll be a resume building session, and there people will be like add like only 3 lines for an experience or 4 lines for a project or stuff like that, and they'll ask you to stick to a template and like this is how you should write stuff. uh, my experience generally has been kind of contradictory. uh, I had so in my opinion, if you're very good at something, you should like make it reflect on your resume. It should stand out on your resume. So in my experience, I was very good at AWS and Linux, and I think that was my best part. That like that's where I shined. So I there was an experience with 7 lines in it, 7 different bullet points. It's generally not advised for you to do, but I still did it. And like in my first Wells Fargo interview, that's all we focused on. I wasn't asked a single DSA question. So yeah, I think if you don't like DSA that much, and if you think you're better at something else, then this is very important for you. You should focus on your resume and focus on making a good resume. And yeah, I think Pratham covered mostly everything very well. I only covered points where I thought like I could be different. I had different experience from Pratham, but generally stick to Pratham's advice and don't. So like if you stick to Pratham's advice, you won't be in my situation. So yeah, try focusing on that. Try like beginning before like March or something, like right after midsems would be a good time to start. Um, that's it on my part. Anshal will take over to explain his experience. He's a non-CS student, so that'll be helpful for you. I think.
Okay, hi. So I am Anshal and I'll be interviewing with Cisco during the summer. I also get selected as a student developer in GSoC 2021. I'll be talking more about things specific to non-CS branches and some other suggestions based on my experience. So mostly Pratham told that the companies have a CS cutoff, but companies will have CS higher CG cutoffs for non-CS branches like Disha and APT portfolio had a CS cutoff of 7, and for circuit branches they had a cutoff of 8. So also don't just consider CG as a qualifying criteria. There are chances that you won't even get a online test link if you have barely managed to clear the CG cutoff. Like in case of Wells Fargo, the CG cutoff was 7, but many student even with many non-CSS students even with CG of 7.8 and 7.9 didn't get the test link. Apart from that, having good projects, as Tirth has already mentioned, helps a lot. Like you'll get some point to talk in the interviews. Like in my experience, I had 3 interviews, and in 2 of them, most of my discussion was based on the projects what I had written in my resume. Like in my second interview, it was a manager round, and he asked me about about a situation where I faced some difficulty and how I solved it. So I explained him about a situation where I was hosting a website using Docker, and then we proceeded to discuss about Docker, what are the integrities about it, and why it should be used. So you can always drive your interview and focus on the parts where you are more comfortable at. Like I was also not very comfortable in DSA, so I used to talk more about software development and backend development, to be specific, because I have been doing it since quite a long time. Once you get shortlisted, you should focus more on company specific questions. Like if you look at Goldman Sachs, they have a history of mainly focusing on puzzles and probability based questions. Also, like Cisco generally asks some question related to networks. So once you get shortlisted, you can see how what kind of questions are more likely to be asked. Also, this is generally not very frequent, but interviewers might also ask you about the relevant coursework. Like in my case, my interview asked me that what did I learn in UP and basics about Cisco and risk architecture and some other relevant courses like DD. So what did I study in that? So it is good to revise a bit about it as well. Though this won't be very frequent. I guess I haven't heard anyone else facing a similar situation. But if you have some knowledge, it would be a good. Also, for non-CS students, it would be good if you revise OOP. It is necessary to revise OOP, but even if you don't know DBMS, it would be fine. You can always tell the interviewer that you haven't done it in the coursework, and it would be fine. Also, I'll say that you must have a reasonable expectation. Like it is a bit difficult for non-CS students to get an internship, but at the same time, don't lose hope. There would be times when you will think that it is not going to work and you won't be getting an internship. But if you keep trying, you will definitely be able to get it. Like there will be situations like in the Cisco online test. Cisco has this weird thing and they don't allow to solve coding questions in C++. So I had to do it in Python. But during my practice, I always used to do it in C++. So you might face such situations, but you have to act calmly, and there are chances that you will get the intern season you will get an intern by the end of the intern season. Also, if you don't get an intern, just try to have some projects on your resume, and then you can always explore some off-campus opportunities. You can reach out to people on LinkedIn, or your seniors might also help you get a off-campus intern. You can apply it using the company's portal. So yeah, that's it from my side. Athar will be continuing on how you can get in research intern.
Hello. Yeah. Awesome. So just before I proceed, like last slide, we have kind of attached a few resources which you can refer to. Which it's obviously not a comprehensive list, but some of the resources which we have used. Yeah. All right. So let's move on to research internships. So before we begin, I'm Atharv. I'm currently a research intern at Harvard BCG, Virtual Computing Group, and I'll be joining Wells Fargo in upcoming summer as an SD intern. All right. So for research internships, why should you even care? Next slide, please. So yeah, basically during our college life, like there are very less number of opportunities which we get for research via on campus. So there are SOPs, but they also have their own limitations in terms of exposure which you get. So going for a research intern would really help you explore the field of whatever field which you want to do research in, and also like have an experience what real research in that field looks like. As well as the another point important is like till now you would there are like I was from my experience as well, like I was pretty confused whether I research is for me or I really like research or not, or some those questions. So it's always good to have some concrete experience first so that we understand like are we made or is that what excites us. So this would be a good opportunity for you to explore and understand like as research for you. Also, like obviously, it will give you a great opportunity to work under really cutting edge technology outside professors or even in like uh, universities like IITs, ISC. You can always apply and get an intern under professors who are like pioneers in the fields. And yeah, lastly, like it's important to get a research intern if you want to like pursue higher studies in the future. Majorly because like it would be a good highlight about like you're really interested in research. It kind of highlights that pretty well, as well as like it's a major bullet point for your CV while applying for these MS Masters programs. Yeah, next slide, please. Yeah. So how do you get an intern? So there are there's a lot of ways which you can get an intern, a research intern. So majorly, the most common way is via the research programs. So there are research programs like I'll be mentioning the major ones. I'll be discussing those in the upcoming slides. So, so there are research programs which you can apply for. Then you can always apply via cold mailing. So that's like this, directly applying to the professor who you're interested to work under, and then discuss the opportunities there. So there are also campus opportunities and referrals. So for from a personal experience, I was very lucky to get the intern via the campus. Like, it wasn't really an campus opportunity, I'd say, but it was so the mail for the Harvard VCG recruiting came via the placement coordinator for our campus itself. So that was where I got my opportunity to work for VCG came from. And so yeah, always look out and check your mails regularly. And yeah, there is also IPCD who offers good like opportunities. So continuously there are some opportunities coming up there as well. So suggest you'll definitely keep a track of those as well. Other than that, there's also LinkedIn and Twitter where there are like a lot of postings about these. However, I'll say like this is a pretty difficult pathway to get an intern because simply because like it's a public kind of uh, like thousands of people could even apply for a single role. So it's a public disclosure. So it will kind of gets very difficult to get an intern via that pathway. But that's still one of the ways you can get an intern from. And lastly, like, if there's a specific lab which whose work you've really found interesting and you've been following their work, so there are lab postings on the lab websites as well. So you can obviously follow those, like for the major labs which you're interested in, and like apply for via those pathways. Yeah. Next slide, please. So, like before I talk about the research programs, I like to like firstly mention what are the requirements which you usually have. So these are like requirements which is I'll recommend you to have in place before the programs deadlines and all are come close. So it's usually recommended to have those ready by, let's say, September end or maybe early October. So yeah, keeping your CV ready is obviously the most important point. So I won't be diving deep into CV specific or like any of these specifics of how you build these. You can always find good resources for those. Like I've attached this link at the bottom, so they are like good advice as to what a good CV should have. So yeah, other than that, like most of these programs would require a letter of recommendation from one or two profs. So these would mostly come from BITS professors, or it could even be from one of the PS research stations. If you get a PS within a research station, so you can go get a letter of recommendation for that from there as well. And it's usually a good idea. Like, it would be really good if your professor directly writes a letter of recommendation for you. But sometimes the professor asks you to write and give him a draft for the letter so that he can use that as the kind of template and then submit the letter. So it's a good idea to keep the drafts for those ready before the season, like the application season begins, I'll say. And other than that, there's a motivation letter or statement of purpose or like research statement. There are a lot of different ways to put this term as. So basically, it's what is your motivation or your theory? Like why do you want to do research in a specific field? So that's basically your story, why you want to pursue research in that field. So that is what is needed. Again, resources for how to write that is again is like compiled pretty well by Shalini in the link at the bottom. And yeah, it's so about CGPA research. Internships do require decent CGPA for application via these programs mostly. So they uh, let's say cutoff for most programs is like 8 or 8.5 plus. So it's 8.5 is a pretty safe CG to have, and 8 is kind of hopeful, but like just like summer intern season, like it's similar year as well. So it's usually people with higher CG are preferred. So it's a good idea to maintain 8.5 plus. Yeah. Next slide, please. Yeah, so for the research programs, I've listed down a few of the common research programs out there. So you can always like apply to those as well. Like this is not obviously nowhere close to exhaustive, so there are way more opportunities for undergrad. So you can find those at the link at the bottom. So again, this is not exactly exhaustive at the link at the bottom as well, because like it's there are really a lot many programs out there, but these are the most common ones which I've listed down here. So you should definitely try to apply to these. And the timelines for most of these is from November to February. So there is, some of those would start from November till mid December or something like that. But my tax is usually a bit earlier than these. So just keep note of those as well. So if you're planning to apply for these, make sure you're kind of keeping a track of the deadlines right from August itself, so that you know when those deadlines are going to approach. And yeah, most of these opportunities would be for CS students, or like not exactly CS students, CS related fields. So those would be in those fields. Like, but there's always opportunities for other streams as well in some programs like MyTax as well as START. As I think Chapa also has that. So like make sure to check those out and what those are before applying. Yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, so about MyTax, so the process, I'm kind of focusing on MyTax simply because it is one of the most applied programs, and like most people apply to it. So it's a good idea. I think it's a good idea to like give you a brief how the process is. So about there's a central application portal which where you'll go and apply. So like you'll find the link obviously by simply googling it. So you can go to the portal. They expect you to create a profile as soon as the uh, portal is unlocked, basically for your season. And the profile will be like basically the documents which I mentioned in the previous slides: your CV, your letter of recommendations. So one or two. That is two is always preferred to have, but at least I think even one would do for my tax. And as well as like yeah, so again, for LORs, there are two pathways, I think, for my tax. So one is you can directly upload a PDF, or second is like you can send a link to your recommender, and then he or she can upload it from her site. Whichever is suitable for you, you can use that. But usually, if the recommender sends it in via the email, so it's kind of has more authenticity to it, I'd say. Like it's more trusted. And yes, also the next part while creating or like applying itself at the application stage itself. Can you go to the previous slide? Previous. Yeah, sorry. Uh, yeah, so MyTex also has like you have to shortlist some projects which you are interested in. So they release a bunch of projects which are like which span all fields, and it's not just related to even CS fields. It's everything from biology people to CS to everything, like even electronics, I think. So yeah, so you'll be basically given those projects, and you'll have to like filter seven. I think maximum is seven, minimum is three, 3 to 7 projects for while applying, which most interest you. And yeah, so while this is kind of the application where most of your part would be done right after doing this. Next is usually the interactions as well as interviews with the professors, which happens in 2 waves. You don't have to worry about that right now. So basically, there sometimes there this is optional, obviously. Sometimes the professor do contact. Sometimes they don't really contact. They simply filter you out based on your profiles. And yeah, that's it. After that, the results come. Similar programs which have this process are like REST, CERN, OpenLab, ETH, Zurich Summer Program, and there are many others. So, but like this is kind of the framework. So I'm just letting you know at this time because so that you have your documents ready. Also, like this transcript, I forgot to mention. There's also a transcript which is required. So it's a good idea to order the transcript well before the deadlines so that so you basically need transcript from the AUGSD portal. So they usually take a few days to process that. So just make sure you order that well before. Yeah, next slide, please. So for that as well as Chatpak, the process is slightly different. Basic idea is you have to get approval from the professors first. So there are some bunch of universities affiliated with the program. So for let's say DART, it's usually the German universities, and for Chapak, it's the French universities. So you'll basically have to get a permission for working under certain professor of those universities, and you get an approval. You mail them, you get an approval from them, and then apply on the DART portal, which is basically DART is grant mostly for grant related purposes. It's not a program for like is as comprehensive and as my tax. And yeah, so you'll basically just be applying with the relevant documents on that portal. The major part of this is getting an approval from the professors from German or French for in case of Charpak universities. Yeah. About the cold mailing, I'll for like ask Uday to come up and like continue for that.
Hello everyone, I am Uday Singla and I'm currently a research assistant at the University of Southern California. And today I'm going to quickly talk about cold mailing, which is something which Atharva mentioned in his slides. So the very first thing which you need to do before writing a mail is to do your research. What I mean by this is you need to read about the professor's work and explore the lab group's research page so you get a general idea of what the professor is working on and the general themes that are being worked upon in the group. You may also go to the Google Scholar page of the professor and try to read the abstract and which you find interesting. Something about the more specific you are about the domain of interest, the better are your chances of getting a reply. Next, you definitely need to build your CV. I would suggest to use LaTeX for it. And one important thing is do not attach your CV in the mail as an attachment because there is a chance that it might end up getting in the spam folder. So I would suggest to upload it on Google Drive or some other cloud service and use the hyperlink in the mail. Next, you need to put yourself in words. So boast about yourself, but don't put anything falsely. Be authentic. You need to explain how you are the best fit for the project or for the research group. So for that, you can mention relevant courses which are related to the field of interest. And even though you are attaching your CV, which has the list of all your projects and experiences, it's a good idea to talk about your most recent one or some experience which is relevant to the field. That will definitely give your application an edge. And lastly, professors also look for enthusiasm in the candidate. Research work is something that is intensive and would require you to consistently put in efforts. So if you are self-motivated and you can show it to the prof through your words, that would definitely be a good point for you. Next. Yes, so the next thing is to structure your mails wisely. I will talk about it in detail in the upcoming slide, but to give a general overview, you should write 3 to 4 concise paragraphs and each paragraph should serve a purpose. And it's important to not forget about the subject line because that is something which will catch the professor's attention first and will prompt him or her to open the mail. So something like application for a research role in XYZ lab, that would work. One thing that is very easy to misspell is the professor's name. And you should pay attention to it and recheck it before sending that you are correctly spelling the professor's name. And one advice from my side is to write your complete mail and then fill in the professor's name and the recipient address. This will also ensure that you are not sending any incomplete mails. Next, you have to be specific in what you want. You should clearly mention when do you wish to start working and whether you want to work remotely on it or go there and work in his or her lab. You should also mention the duration for which you're applying. It could be something like starting in June 2022 for 8 to 10 weeks. Okay, so now that you are done with writing the mail, there comes this important part of scheduling your mails. Ideally, I would suggest that the mails should reach from 8 a.m. to 12 noon in the morning, and make sure you are aware of the time zone in which you are mailing, because it should reach from 8 to 12 in their time zone. And I would suggest to avoid mailing on the weekends, because most of the professors won't check their work emails on the weekends, and that would significantly reduce your chances of getting a reply, because all the mails would pile up and there's a chance the professor might skim through your mail whenever he checks it. And if you're applying for a summer intern role in the offline, so the earlier you start, the better are your chances. So I would suggest to start in September and you can continue mailing up till early December. Why I have written early December is because after that there comes the Christmas holidays and Easter holidays and in general the winter vacation. So I've generally observed that professors are away and they won't reply to your mails, or you would get some automated reply that they are currently away from their office. And when the vacations end, that's usually the early January or mid January, you can again continue mailing, and there is a good chance you might land up with an internship by early March. Later than that, there is very less chance because you need to sort out your visa applications and accommodation and other such stuff. So for doing an offline internship, that would be difficult to get after early March. Next. Okay, so now let us see how I structure my paragraphs. So the very first paragraph, I give a short introduction about myself, which includes the college, my branch, my year of study. And I also mention the reason why I am mailing and the duration for which I'm applying. And one thing which I do here is I link the college's main website in the text, so that if the professor is unaware of the university, he can go ahead and check it through the website. In the next paragraph, I talk about professors' work and what actually got me interested. So professors are usually quite interested to talk about their research. So if you have read some articles or research papers and you can ask some questions, that would be a plus point. But in general, you should be aware of what domain the professor is working on, and the more specific you can be, the better are your chances. Then in the third paragraph, I talk about my experience and what makes me fit for the project. And it is in this paragraph only that I link my CV as well. And this includes all the things which I've talked about. You could include your courses or your projects or any other experience. And finally, in the fourth paragraph, I conclude the mail and I write that I'm open to providing any more information if required, which could include transcripts and in very, very rare cases, a recommendation letter. Now, here comes a question of whether you should mention your CGPA or not. I would say if you have a CGPA of 8.5 plus, you should definitely mention it. It's a good CGPA. 8.5 plus also has decent chances, but below that, I would recommend not to explicitly mention it unless the professor asks for it. And there is a good chance that you will end up with an internship, irrespective of your CGPA. It doesn't create much of a difference while you're cold mailing, and it would largely depend on your experience and how motivated you are and the kind of efforts you have put in before. So I would like to conclude by saying that patience is key here. All you need is one response from a professor to get an intern, and that you could get it in the first 10 mails, or you may even have to write hundreds or 200 mails. So you have to not lose hope and be consistent. And if you keep trying, you'll definitely end up somewhere. So with that, I wish you best of luck for the intern season. And now we are open to questions.
So here we have a question which is asking if we could tell you about what our questions are asked for about personal projects. So what you can do about personal projects is you can, if you have something to present at the at the start, you ask them if you can uh, present your projects from your sites, and I think these or can tell us more on this or
Uh, yeah, sure. So, for personal projects, it usually depends. So, interviewers will only ask you about personal questions or personal projects if they are familiar with the tech or if they're familiar with what you're trying to do. So, if it's very obscure, I would not mention it on my resume at all because it's only projects are only helpful as a talking point during the interview. So, in my interview, I had worked with MongoDB and JavaScript. So I was asked with like what version of MongoDB was I using, if I had like transactions or like generally questions about MongoDB. Even like as Anshal mentioned, he was asked about Docker a lot. So if the interviewer is familiar with the tech you're using, they'll generally try to discuss it more than the project. They'll try to discuss like the tech you're working with. Uh,
one more quick question here, which says which as for the 2022 starts for SI. No, we do not have them yet. The placement unit has not announced. The last we heard from them that by the end of September, around 250 uh, of the people who were trying to get an intern got one. I heard that some companies are biased towards CA students. Can you please elaborate on this part, and what would you advise to Triple E and ENI students? Anshul?
Yes. Yeah. So this is something you will face a lot during the intern season. What I'd suggest is don't lose hope, and if you have some projects on your CV, it would be good. Apart from that, you can't do much about it. Just focus on what you have on your hands and just keep trying. You'll you might get an intern. Like even many of the triple ENI students also get it. So it's yeah, they are biased towards CSS students, but still you can get one.
Some people are also asking if there's a if their CGA is less than 7, is there still a chance? So there are companies which have a lower cutoff. You are going to find companies in in the intern season. And at this point, I would like to repeat that about code force and code chef versus lead code. That code force and code chef are for competitive programming in a different way. The questions you are going to get in the online coding test are going to be the one based on concepts. Like there might be a question on trees, so it will be a much more of a direct direct question. Instead, what you find on code chef and code forces are not direct questions. They will be molded into some sort of a story way, but we do not usually have that in our online coding tests. So I would recommend that that you do treat code and you practice around 200 questions on it. So that should be good enough instead of code chef or code forces. Then okay, I want to know the can you discuss how can we try getting off-campus software interns? So as far as I know, the off-campus opportunities have just opened up. They usually open up around uh, January or December. I personally don't have, that much experience in it, so if someone else could take this up.
campus, it's generally, so you'll have to like keep an open eye. People post opportunities almost everywhere. So you'll find some on LinkedIn, you'll find some on Twitter. Uh, yeah, so like generally, it's also advisable to have a good network of people. So people who are working in companies already, you can try asking them for opportunities. Sometimes opportunities are not like openly announced, so you can also try cold mailing there. It's generally advisable to have a good resume filled with projects and experiences if you're looking for an off-campus internship. Or some off-campus interns still require you to like do DSA in their interviews. I mean, like there's no easy way to escape DSA, but yeah, like to get selected for an interview, you should have a like good resume with filled with projects. And it's generally easier to get an off-campus intern with networking. So like medicines are almost everywhere. So you can just like try messaging some medicine on LinkedIn or like just like get their numbers from someone, text them on WhatsApp, and they're generally helpful with that. So yeah.
For all the questions about the cutoffs, I would say that every year the placement unit is going to release the stats, and this year's stats would be coming out in by the end of this sem. So just wait for it, so that they will be able to be a much more accurate guide instead of our personal experience. And
Also,
somewhere,
like to add to that, like it would be a good idea to also check out the placement stats with respect to CGPA at least before COVID times, because like in online things have probably got a bit biased, but if it's offline in your case, it could kind of get back to what it was previously. So just keep in like have those
about these following a tutorial course to build a project. I'm not sure. Like if it is a common course or tutorial, then the person in the interview might think that you have not done it. Uh, you have not actually learned from, so what I would recommend it is if you do a tutorial, after that you build a project on your own. You like if you learn something like Node.js or Python framework like Django, then maybe we build a project in it yourself that no one else has built earlier. And is competitive programming helpful in SI prep? Yes, it would be helpful because competitive programming will require you to have a knowledge of the same TSA. The DSA and competitive are not that different. It's just that the type of questions might be a little different, but the backbone of the data structures that you are going to use are going to be the same. Some of the best competitive coders in our batch got an intern at Google. Um, Python could throw a TLE error on the coding platform. No, as far as I know, and as Tirth mentioned, Python will not throw it at TLE. How much time is enough for SI, and how do EEN students can manage time between coding and coursework? Anshal?
Uh, managing time is something that is something specific you will have to see. I'd say that you should do at least 150 to 200 around 150 to 200 questions on lead code. That would be enough. Even I did around 130 questions. So apart from that, you will get time during the summer break. At that time you won't be having any coursework. You can even start your prep then, and even then you can get an internship. Yeah, that.
I think we have covered. Okay, there's one more question right now.
Yeah, there's another question that do people with the range of 7 to 7.5 get in summer intern? So, like, yeah, even I had a CGPA of less than 7.5 and I have a summer intern. So, yes, people do get a summer intern with less than 7.5 CG.
Can dualites explore off-campus intern when singlets are doing their SI? If yes, how should we get prepared? Or there you might want to take this up.
I think they're not talking about research intern. I think they're talking about something in the industry.
Yeah, so like you generally can. I mean, it's your choice. If it's a good way to spend a summer, plus it like adds to your resume. So definitely you should look for something if you can. Uh, Generally you'll need like some proof of like work in the past if you're looking for an off-campus intern. This proof can come in like an experience or a project. So yeah, generally try to like focus on projects for off-campus interns.
Is there a bias between dual and single degree students? Not that I know of. I haven't heard this that companies are favoring the dual degree single degree students.
That is generally not the case, though there will be some companies like I remember Accenture was one which was only open for dual students. But if a company is open for both single and dual degree students, there won't be a bias, I guess, because in Cisco many of the students like the ratio is almost 1:1. So most probably there won't be a bias if they are allowing both dual degree and single degree students.
Okay. Someone has asked what type of design patterns are asked for roofs. So for the design patterns, like if you remember, there was this one design pattern for implementing payment interfaces. Like what design pattern should you use if you want to have different interfaces, like different payment methods. Like you want to allow Paytm, you also want to allow PayPal or GPay. So there's one particular method I do not remember right now, but this was the exact question that was asked to me to create a payment system. There's also this diamond problem, and that can be uh, circumvented sort of using some design pattern. I was also asked this question, and so this is what they usually ask for design patterns. Are there companies that allow only say CS students to sit for coding tests? If yes, can you name a few? I don't
Bloomberg
remember.
was one.
Yeah, Bloom.
APT too.
APT was open for both circuit and CS. Circuit has a higher had a higher cutoff. Bloomberg was only open for CS students. I just remember one. So not many such companies are there.
Anything else?
We'll wait for a minute. If there are no questions, like, I think we can wind up then.
I think we do not have questions anymore. So okay, there's one more. What is in your CG cutoff? Because I would there's a thing called internal. shortlisting which is not defined. I do not have much idea. Can anyone else take this? Internal shortlisting.
Yeah, so like sometimes companies won't send you a test link, even if you're like in the CG cutoff. I really don't know what like criteria they use for it, but sometimes yeah, this does happen. So yeah.
Yeah, so Wells Fargo was one company I think which did this itself.
Yeah, I just remember of Wells Fargo. Yeah, it had a CG cutoff of 7, but it mostly didn't send test link to around till 7.8, 7.9. Though there might be some exceptions I am not aware of.
Mhm.
Yeah,
There's just one
Good
more
point.
question. OOP is taught in Java, but I'm more confident in C++ as I have done competitive in C++. So should I learn OOP syntax in C++ also? Yeah, definitely. Because some of the companies, the interview might not be that comfortable in Java. Or they specifically to me, they were repetitively asking to implement something using the C++ like a linked list. So they wanted me to know what is a virtual function in when it comes to the oops in C++. And they also wanted me to know what is the difference between struct and a class in C++ because both are quite similar for that language. So I would recommend it, yeah, like do not totally depend on Java for oops. Have a bit of knowledge for OOP about OOP and C++ also. So now we would be winding up this session. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.